What happens when the person you gave everything to sells you for $3? It all started when I was trying to do something good, and that's exactly when I faced their ultimate betrayal. But what they didn't know is that the one thing they couldn't take from me was my pride. I'm a mother, and I'm a fighter. But when they tried to silence me, I had to show them I'm not for sale. The consequences of their greed were so shocking, it changed everything. The way I see it, a life is a mosaic. Every single piece, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, be it a joyous moment or a bitter disappointment, comes together to form one whole, complete picture. Now that I'm in my early 60s, I look at my life, at its almost finished pattern, and try to understand, where did it all go wrong? I've always been the kind of person who gives everything. My door was always open, and my heart had room even for those who didn't deserve it. When I first met my daughter, Lizzie, and her husband, Joel, they were like lost lambs looking for shelter. They had nothing but empty pockets and ambitions bigger than themselves. I took them into my home, my heart, my life. I gave them everything I had, my life savings, which I had planned to use to start a small charity for stray animals. I gave to them so they could start their business. And what did I get in return? I got betrayed. But I always knew that there was one thing they couldn't take from me: my pride. Just the other day, I was sorting through old belongings in my basement, getting them ready for a charity sale. I was going through old books, photo albums, jewelry boxes, and memories came flooding back. I remember the first time I saw my daughter, Lizzie. She was so fragile, so vulnerable. I wanted to protect her from the whole world, from all its hardships, all its disappointments. And I believed I could. I remember her marrying Joel. He was so sweet, so caring, so thoughtful. He always said he loved me like his own mother, and I believed him. I believed them both. I found an old jewelry box my mother gave me. Inside were the old silver earrings she wore on her wedding day. I took them out and put them on. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw in it not just my own reflection, but a mosaic of my past, a story of love and betrayal. As I stood there, lost in thought, the phone rang. It was Lizzie. Her voice, once so sweet and gentle, now had a cold, businesslike tone. "Mom," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "we've decided it's time for you to move out. We need the space for a new project." A new project. A new way to sell me out, I thought bitterly. My heart sank, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my home, the home where I raised her, where she took her first steps, where she said her first words. And now, after all I had done for them, they were kicking me out. The audacity of it all was simply breathtaking. It was like she was selling a piece of furniture, not evicting her own mother. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand to know how they could do this to me. But I just stood there, speechless. The mosaic of my life, which I had thought was a beautiful, complete work of art, was now shattered into a million sharp, jagged pieces. "We found a wonderful senior living community for you," Lizzie continued, her voice still unnervingly calm. "It's a great place with people your age, and they have all the activities you love, like bridge and bingo." Bridge and bingo? Was this a joke? I didn't want bridge and bingo. I wanted my home. I wanted my life. But my voice wouldn't come. My throat was tight and my eyes filled with tears. I felt like I was being suffocated by their greed, their coldness, their indifference. It was so completely unexpected, so perfectly timed to coincide with my attempt to do something good. It was the moment I was at my most selfless that I was met with their selfishness. It was a cruel irony. I finally managed to speak, my voice a shaky whisper. "Lizzie, how could you?" I asked, the words barely audible. "After everything I've done for you." "Mom, don't be dramatic," she said, her voice sharp with impatience. "It's for the best. We'll help you pack. You can move in next week." Move in next week? I felt like I was in a bad dream. I wanted to wake up, to find myself back in my bed, to find that this was all just a terrible nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. And as I hung up the phone, I knew that I had lost everything. Everything except my pride. But what was pride without a home, without a family, without a life? I felt completely defeated. The truth was, my children had sold me out for a pittance, for a tiny sliver of a business that would never compare to what I had given them. It was a new kind of cruelty, a moral betrayal disguised as progress, and I, the old fool, was left to pick up the pieces. Is this it? I muttered to myself, looking around my basement. Was this the final scene of my life story? The tragic conclusion? My life, my love, my everything was now reduced to this. I had been so wrong about everything. I had thought my family was my strength, but they were my weakness. I had thought my home was my sanctuary, but it was just a piece of property they wanted to use for their own selfish needs. I felt so foolish, so naive, so unbelievably stupid. All my life I had been building a house on sand, and now the tide is coming in to wash it all away. I couldn't just stand here and let it happen. I had to do something. But what? I was an old woman with nothing but a broken heart and a shattered life. What could I possibly do to fight against the people I loved most in the world? My mind was racing, trying to find a way out of this impossible situation. But every path I considered seemed to lead to the same dead end. I was trapped. But as I stood there, in the silence of my basement, a new thought began to take shape. It was a thought that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Maybe this wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the beginning. Maybe my children's betrayal, their greed, their coldness, was not a curse, but a gift. Maybe it was a wake-up call, a sign that I needed to stop giving and start taking. Not to take from them, but to take back my life, to fight for my home, for my pride, for my dignity. I don't know what will happen next, but I'm ready to find out. Subscribe to the channel and don't miss the next chapter of my story. You won't believe what happens when a mother is pushed to her limits. I felt an eerie silence after I hung up with Lizzie. A silence so profound it was almost a presence in the room. The basement, which had always been a sanctuary of memories, now felt like a tomb. The air, once filled with the scent of old paper and dust, was thick with the weight of her words. "Don't be dramatic," she had said. The irony of it was suffocating. She, who had always been a master of drama, who had cried for 3 days straight when I told her she couldn't have that expensive designer handbag in high school, was now telling me not to be dramatic. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the empty space around me. I was 63 years old, a woman who had lived a life of grace and dignity, and now I was being treated like a petulant child who had overstayed her welcome. I walked over to a stack of boxes and pulled one out. It was filled with old letters, carefully tied with a ribbon. I sat down on a dusty rug, the one I had bought with my first paycheck as a young woman, and untied the ribbon. I read through the letters, each one a testament to a life I once had, a life filled with love, laughter, and hope. I read a letter from my husband, written before he passed away, in which he told me how much he loved me, how proud he was of me, and how he knew I would always be strong, no matter what happened. Tears welled up in my eyes as I remembered his words. He had always been my rock, my anchor in the storm, and now, without him, I felt like a ship lost at sea, with no one to guide me. But as I read his words, a new feeling began to stir within me. It wasn't despair or sadness or anger. It was a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just my husband's wife or Lizzie's mother. I was a person with a name and a story, and I would not let them erase me. I would not let them turn me into a ghost in my own home. I would not let them win. I looked at the letter in my hand, at the familiar handwriting, and I made a promise to myself. I would fight. I would fight for my home, for my memories, for my life. I would show them that I was not a burden, but a legacy. And I would not be sold for $3 measly or for any amount of money in the world. I stood up, the dust from the rug clinging to my clothes like a second skin. I put the letters back in the box and sealed it with tape. I wasn't ready to pack, not yet. I had a lot to do before that. I went back upstairs, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and plans. I walked through the house, each chapter in my life. The living room where we had spent countless hours watching movies and playing board games. The kitchen where I had taught Lizzie how to bake her first pie. The bedroom where I had held my husband's hand as he took his last breath. Every corner of this house was filled with memories, and I would not let them be swept away by my children's greed. The next day, I went to the bank and withdrew a small amount of cash. I needed it to start my plan. I went to the local hardware store and bought a few things: a large canvas, some paints, and a new set of brushes. I had always loved to paint, but I had put my passion on the back burner to focus on my family. Now it was time to bring it back. My children wanted to use my home for their new project? Fine. I would give them a project they would never forget. A masterpiece of my own creation, a work of art that would expose their betrayal for the world to see. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I had to. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. I spent the next few days working on my project, locked away in the attic. I worked tirelessly, my hands covered in paint, my mind filled with images of my children's faces, their betrayal, their greed. I painted a picture of a woman, a mother, standing in front of an empty house, her face a mask of sorrow and betrayal. In her hands, she held a single-dollar bill. And behind her in the shadows, I painted the silhouettes of her children, their hands outstretched, reaching for the money. I was not a professional artist, but I poured all my anger, all my pain, all my humiliation into every brushstroke. It was my way of taking back control, of turning my pain into power. And as I worked, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I finished the painting a few days later, and I stood back, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a masterpiece, not in the traditional sense of the word, but in its raw, unfiltered emotion. It was my story, told in colors and shapes, a story of a mother who was sold for $3. And now, it was time to show the world. My hands were shaking as I carefully took the painting downstairs and placed it in the middle of the living room. I then went to my computer and started writing an email to a local newspaper, telling them my story. I didn't care if they believed me or not. All I cared about was that my story was told, and that my children, my beautiful, ungrateful children, would finally get what they deserved. My hands trembled as I hit send. The email, a plea for justice and a raw confession of a mother's pain, was now out in the ether, a digital message in a bottle cast out to sea. I didn't know if anyone would ever read it, or if it would just get lost in the endless ocean of unread emails. But a part of me, a small, stubborn part, believed that my story would find its way to the right person. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of fear and exhilaration. It was a terrifying gamble, a public airing of a private betrayal, but I had nothing left to lose. My dignity had already been sold for a pittance, so why not sell this story for the world to see? I spent the next day pacing the house, a ghost in my own home. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every chime of the doorbell made me jump. My phone was a silent monument to their indifference. Lizzie hadn't called. Joel hadn't called. It was as if I had already moved out, already ceased to exist. Their silence was a new kind of cruelty, a passive-aggressive way of telling me I was no longer a part of their lives. It was like a slow, deliberate amputation, and with every passing minute, I felt another part of me being cut away. I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait for the inevitable. I had to do something. I had to take control of my own narrative. I went to the local library, a place that had always been a sanctuary for me. I spent hours there, not reading books, but using the public computers to research. I looked up every local newspaper, every news station, every blog that covered human interest stories. I sent them my email, my painting, and a brief, heartfelt summary of what had happened to me. I was a one-woman media campaign, a mother on a mission, a woman who had been wronged and was not afraid to fight back. I was no longer the naive, trusting woman who had given away her life savings. I was a warrior, armed with a keyboard and a broken heart, and I was ready for battle. A few days later, my phone finally rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs as I answered it. It was a journalist from a local news station, a young woman with a kind voice named Sarah. She told me she had read my email, seen my painting, and was deeply moved by my story. She wanted to do a piece on me, a feature story that would expose the injustices I had faced. My hands were shaking as I agreed. This was it. This was my chance. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I was going to be heard. The next day, Sarah and her camera crew came to my house. I showed them around, each room a silent witness to a life I had lived. I showed them the kitchen where I had cooked countless meals for my family. I showed them the living room where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays. And I showed them the basement where I had sorted through my memories and where I had made the painful decision to fight back. I told them my story, my voice thick with emotion, but also with a newfound strength. I told them how I had given everything to my children and how they had sold me out for a pittance. I told them about the painting and how it was my way of showing the world that I was not for sale. As I spoke, I could see the emotion in Sarah's eyes. She listened with a quiet intensity, her face a mask of compassion and outrage. She asked me questions, not to pry but to understand. She wanted to know every detail, every nuance, every heartbreak. And I gave it to her. I held nothing back. I told her everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I told her how I had felt like a ghost in my own home, a burden to my own children. And I told her that I was no longer that person. I was a fighter, a survivor, a woman who is not afraid to stand up for herself. After Sarah and her crew left, the house felt even more empty than before. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the flurry of activity that had just taken place. I knew the story would air in a few days, but the waiting was agonizing. It was a new kind of limbo, a purgatory of my own making. I tried to distract myself with a book, with a movie, with anything that would take my mind off the looming broadcast, but it was no use. My mind kept replaying the conversation with Sarah, every word, every emotion, every tear. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake, that I had just signed my own death warrant. What if my children found out? What would they do? I was terrified, but at the same time, I felt a sense of liberation I hadn't felt in years. Then the emails started coming in. At first, it was just a few from people who had read my story on the newspaper's website. They were full of sympathy and support. Then the number started to grow. Soon, my inbox was flooded with emails from people from all over the country, all with the same message. I'm so sorry. I know what you're going through. I'm with you. I was overwhelmed. I had no idea that my story would resonate with so many people. I had thought I was alone, a lonely, broken woman in a world that didn't care. But I was wrong. I was not alone. I was a part of a community of people who had been wronged and who had been betrayed, just like me. A few days later, the news story aired. I watched it from my couch, my heart pounding in my chest. I saw my face on the screen, my voice, my story, all laid bare for the world to see. It was a surreal experience watching my life unfold on a television screen, but it was also empowering. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a voice. I felt like I was finally being heard. The next day, my phone rang. It was Lizzie. Her voice was not cold and businesslike anymore. It was shrill and full of a furious indignation. "Mom," she screamed, her voice shaking with rage. "What the hell did you do? The whole world knows. You've ruined us." Ruined them. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. They had ruined me, and now they were mad that I was finally telling the truth. I felt a surge of power, a cold, calm, unwavering resolve. "I didn't do anything, Lizzie," I said, my voice as calm as a summer breeze. "I just told the truth.
You're the one who sold me for $3. And with that, I hung up. I didn't need to hear her excuses, her lies, her false promises. I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. I had been a friend, a mother, a wife. I had been a giver, a nurturer, a protector. But now I was something new. I was a fighter, and I was not for sale.
The day after the news story aired, my life changed in a way I could never have anticipated. My phone, which had been silent for so long, was now ringing off the hook. It wasn't just Sarah from the news station anymore. It was reporters from all over the country, from major news outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post. My story had gone viral. It was the talk of the town, the nation, and even the world. It was a whirlwind of interviews, photo shoots, and late-night calls. I was no longer just an ordinary woman. I was a symbol, a beacon of hope for people who had been wronged, a warrior fighting for her dignity. It was overwhelming, but at the same time, it was exactly what I had wanted. I was finally being heard. I received hundreds of emails, not just from people who had been wronged by their own children, but from lawyers, from social workers, from people who wanted to help. One email in particular caught my attention. It was from a woman named Lisa, a lawyer who specialized in family law. She told me she had been following my story and was deeply moved by it. She wanted to help me, free of charge. I was hesitant at first. I had been so betrayed by my own family that I found it hard to trust anyone. But there was something about her email, a genuine sincerity that I couldn't ignore. I decided to take a chance. We met the next day at a small cafe near my house. Lisa was a young woman, no older than 30, but with a wisdom and a kindness that belied her age. She listened patiently as I told her my story, her eyes filled with compassion. She asked me questions, not to pry, but to understand. She wanted to know every detail, every nuance, every heartbreak, and I gave it to her. I held nothing back. I told her everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I told her that I had felt like a ghost in my own home, a burden to my own children. And I told her that I was no longer that person. I was a fighter, a survivor, a woman who was not afraid to stand up for herself. "This is not a legal case, you know," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're fighting for something much bigger than that. You're fighting for justice, for dignity, for a new kind of family. And I want to help you." I was so moved by her words that I could barely speak. I had been so focused on my own pain, on my own anger, that I had forgotten that there were people in the world who were still good, who were still willing to fight for what was right. I felt a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. I was no longer alone. I had a new ally, a new friend, a new family. Over the next few weeks, Lisa and I worked together to build my case. She helped me gather all the documents, all the evidence, all the proof I needed to show the world that I had been wronged. We went through old bank statements, old emails, old letters. We compiled a mountain of evidence, a testament to my generosity and their greed. I was no longer just an old woman with a broken heart. I was a woman with a plan, a woman with a purpose, a woman who was not afraid to fight back. The world was watching. The media attention had reached a fever pitch. People were lining up outside my house holding signs that said, "We're with you, Mom," and "Justice for all." It was surreal, but it was also a source of strength. I was no longer fighting for myself. I was fighting for all the mothers, all the fathers, all the people who had been wronged by their own family. I was a voice for the voiceless. Then, one day, Lizzie and Joel showed up at my door. They were not the same people I had seen a few weeks ago. Their faces were pale. Their eyes were filled with fear and anger. They were no longer the confident, entitled children who had tried to throw me out of my own home. They were scared, and they were desperate. They had no idea that their actions would have such a massive effect, that their selfish act would be exposed to the world. Mom, Lizzie said, her voice trembling, you have to stop this. You're ruining our lives. Our business is falling apart. People are calling us, harassing us. They're calling us monsters. I looked at them and I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, no sadness, just a cold, hard resolve. They had not come to apologize. They had come to ask me to save them from the consequences of their own actions. They had come to ask me to be their mother again, to be the one who would clean up their mess, to be the one who would sacrifice herself for their happiness. You've already ruined your own lives, I said, my voice as calm as a summer breeze. I'm just telling the world the truth. I'm just showing them what you've done. You sold me for $3 and now you want me to buy you back for free? I don't think so. Joel's face turned red with anger. How could you do this to us? We're your family. We're your blood. I laughed, a cold, bitter sound that echoed in the empty hallway. You're my family? I said, my voice filled with a sarcastic contempt. The family I know would never sell me out. The family I know would never throw me out on the street. You are not my family. You are a couple of strangers who have used me, who have abused me, who have betrayed me. And now you're going to face the consequences. They stood there, speechless, their face a mask of shock and disbelief. They had never seen me like this before. They had always seen me as the kind, gentle, loving mother who would do anything for them. They had never seen the warrior, the fighter, the woman who would not be sold. And as I looked at them, I knew that I had won. I had not won a legal battle. I had won something much bigger than that. I had won my dignity, my pride, my life. I was not for sale. My victory was short-lived. A few days after Lizzie and Joel's desperate visit, I received a court order. They were suing me for defamation. Their lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man with a condescending smirk, claimed that my public accusations had caused irreparable damage to their business and reputation. They were demanding a staggering amount in damages, an amount that would not only take my home, but every last cent I had to my name. It was a new kind of cruelty, a legal weapon disguised as a search for justice. They wanted to silence me, to bankrupt me, to break my spirit and prove that I was just an old dramatic fool. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, cold and all-consuming. I was not a lawyer. I was a woman who had spent her life baking pies and raising children. How could I fight against a legal Goliath like this? But then I remembered my husband's words, his promise that I would always be strong no matter what happened. I was a fighter, and I was not afraid. I immediately called Lisa. Her voice when she answered was calm and reassuring. She had seen the headlines, and she had expected this. "Don't worry," she said, her voice filled with a quiet confidence. "We'll fight this. You're not alone." Over the next few weeks, my life became a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and a constant stream of phone calls. Lisa was my rock, my anchor in the storm. She was a brilliant lawyer, but more than that, she was a true friend. She believed in me, in my story, and in our fight for justice. She helped me prepare for my deposition, rehearsing my answers over and over again. She taught me how to be calm, how to be confident, how to be a warrior in a world of lawyers and judges. The day of the deposition arrived, and I walked into the lawyer's office with a new kind of resolve. Lizzie and Joel were there, their faces a mask of anger and contempt. Their lawyer, Mr. Thompson, looked at me with a smirk, as if I were a foolish old woman who had no idea what she was up against. But I was not a fool. I was a mother who had been wronged, and I was not afraid to tell the truth. I sat at the table, my hands clasped in my lap, and looked him straight in the eye. "Mrs. Peterson," Mr. Thompson began, his voice dripping with condescension, "you've made some very serious accusations against your children. You've claimed that they've betrayed you, that they've sold you out for $3. Do you have any proof of these accusations?" I smiled,
a cold, calm smile that was a perfect replica of his own smirk. I don't have a piece of paper that says, "My children sold me for $3," I said, my voice as calm as a summer breeze, but I have something much more powerful than that. I have the truth, and I have a witness. Their faces, which had been a mask of smug confidence, now turned pale with fear. They looked at each other, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had no idea that I had a secret weapon, a secret that would turn their entire case on its head. I had a witness, a person who had seen everything, a person who had been a part of their betrayal. I had a person who would finally show the world what they had done.
The revelation of a witness sent a ripple of panic across the table. Lizzie's face went from pale to ashen. Joel's jaw clenched, and his eyes started to Mr. Thompson, who for the first time looked genuinely rattled. The smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of professional concern. He leaned forward, his voice a low, threatening hiss. "Mrs. Peterson, you're under oath. Who is this witness? What do they know?" he demanded. I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. It was a sweet, cold taste of victory. "My witness is a person who was there when you came to my house," I said, my voice unwavering. "A person who heard everything you said. A person who saw the way you treated me." Lizzie's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of fear. She knew who I was talking about. She knew I was talking about her own daughter, my granddaughter, Lily. Lily had been in the other room, a silent witness to their cruelty. They had thought she was too young to understand, too naive to care, but they were wrong. Lily was a smart, sensitive girl, and she had seen everything. She had seen her parents' greed, their coldness, their indifference. And she had been so heartbroken by it that she had called me a few days later, crying, asking me why her parents were so mean to me. I had not wanted to involve her. I had not wanted to put her in the middle of this mess. But they had forced my hand. They had made me choose between her and my dignity. And I had chosen both. I would not let them get away with what they had done. I would not let them ruin my life and my granddaughter's as well. I would not let them get away with it. Mr. Thompson, sensing the shift in power, changed his tactics. He tried to discredit me, to portray me as a bitter old woman who was making up stories for attention. He brought up my financial situation, my lack of a job, my reliance on my children's generosity, but his words had no effect. I was no longer a victim. I was a fighter, and I was not afraid. "I may not have a job," I said, with my voice filled with a quiet dignity, "but I have something much more valuable than that. I have a clear conscience. I have the love of my granddaughter. I have the respect of a community that has stood by me, and I have the truth. You can't put a price on that." The deposition ended a few hours later, and I walked out of the office with a newfound sense of purpose. I had told my story. I had faced my accusers. I had stood up for myself. I knew that the fight was not over, that there would be more hearings, more depositions, more legal battles, but I was not afraid. I had an army of people who believed in me, a brilliant lawyer who was fighting for me, and a granddaughter who was a living witness to the truth. And with that, I knew I would win. The day of the court hearing arrived, a crisp Tuesday morning in October. The air was cool, but a nervous heat prickled my skin as I walked into the courthouse. The hallway was a circus of reporters, cameras, and flashing lights. I was a local celebrity, a symbol of a mother's fight for justice. I walked with my head held high, a woman on a mission, a warrior ready for battle. Lisa, my brilliant lawyer and steadfast friend, walked beside me, her hand a reassuring presence on my arm. The courtroom was a sterile, unforgiving space, all dark wood and polished metal. Lizzie and Joel were already there.
their faces a mask of anger and fear. They avoided my gaze, their eyes darting nervously around the room. Mr. Thompson, their lawyer, looked just as smug as he had during the deposition. He was a man who believed in the power of money, and he was confident that his client's wealth would buy them their way out of any trouble. But he was wrong. He didn't know that I had something much more powerful than money. I had the truth. The hearing began, and Mr. Thompson wasted no time launching his attack. He painted a picture of me as a bitter old woman, a freeloader who was trying to ruin her children's lives out of spite. He presented a mountain of financial documents, proof of my financial dependence on them, and a series of emails where I had begged them for money. It was a well-rehearsed performance, a masterclass in manipulation, and I could see the judge's face, a mask of cold professional detachment. Then it was our turn. Lisa rose from her seat, her voice as calm and confident as a summer breeze. She began by presenting our evidence, a timeline of my life, my love, my generosity, and their betrayal. She showed the court the checks I had given them, the loans I had co-signed, the countless acts of kindness that had been repaid with cruelty. She spoke of the emotional toll their actions had taken on me, the sleepless nights, the broken heart, the feeling of being sold for a pittance. But she didn't just present the facts. She presented a human story, a story of a mother who had given everything and a daughter and son-in-law who had taken everything. She showed the court my painting, the raw, unfiltered emotion of a woman who had been wronged. And then she dropped the final bombshell. "We have a witness," she said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "We have a person who was there, a person who saw everything." The judge's eyes, which had been so cold and detached, now held a hint of interest. Lizzie and Joel's faces turned white with fear. They had no idea that I had a secret weapon, a secret that would turn their entire case on its head. I had a witness, a person who had seen everything, a person who had been a part of their betrayal. I had a person who would finally show the world what they had done. It was the moment of truth, the culmination of all my efforts, the final battle in my war for justice. And I was ready to win. The hushed courtroom hung on every word as Lisa called her first and only witness. My granddaughter Lily walked to the stand, her small frame radiating a quiet dignity far beyond her years. Lizzie and Joel's faces contorted in a mix of fury and disbelief. They had expected me to be alone, to be an easy target. They had never considered that the child they had so carelessly ignored could become my greatest ally. Lily's voice, though soft, was clear and unwavering as she recounted the day her parents had demanded I leave my home. She described the cold, hard tone in her mother's voice, the dismissive shrug from her father, and the overwhelming feeling of betrayal that had filled the air. She explained how she had hidden behind the sofa, listening to their conversation, and how she had later called me, her voice trembling, asking why her parents were so mean. Mr. Thompson, in a desperate attempt to salvage his case, tried to paint Lily as a confused child, easily manipulated by a bitter old woman. "Lily," he began, his voice condescendingly sweet, "do you understand what it means to be a witness? Do you understand that your grandmother is using you to hurt your parents?" Lily looked at him, her eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed to silence the room. "I understand what it means to tell the truth," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And the truth is, my parents are not good people. They hurt my grandmother. They sold her for $3, and that's not right." The courtroom erupted in a murmur. The judge's gavel came down hard, and silence descended once more. But the damage was done. Lily's words, her raw, unfiltered truth, had exposed the cold, hard reality of the situation. She was not a confused child. She was a witness, a living testament to her parents' cruelty. The judge, a man who had seen it all, looked at me, then at Lizzie and Joel. He didn't need to hear anything else. The truth was written all over their faces, in their shame, in their anger, in their fear. He slammed his gavel down one last time. "Case dismissed," he said, his voice firm and final. "Mrs. Peterson, you are free to go." I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just stood there. A quiet victory, a new kind of calm within me. Lizzie and Joel rushed out of the courtroom, their heads bowed, their faces a mask of defeat. Mr. Thompson followed close behind, his smirk gone for good. But I stayed, my granddaughter's hand in mine. She was my victory, my legacy, my future. And as I looked at her, I knew that I had not lost anything. I had gained everything. The next few weeks were a blur of media interviews, book deals, and a constant stream of messages from people all over the world. My story had become a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in a world filled with darkness. I had not won a legal battle. I had won something much bigger than that. I had won my life, my dignity, my pride. And I had shown the world that a woman who had been sold for $3 was not for sale. My mosaic was complete, but it was a new kind of art, a masterpiece of resilience, strength, and love. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to live it.